Well, good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. Not since 1992 has so much noise come from the nation's capital. Now, that was the year the Washington Redskins won the Super Bowl. It was the sound of a celebration. Of course, the city has rarely been known for its sport franchises. Now the noise is even louder. It's happy cheering by one side and outright fear from the other, as President Trump suddenly has everyone standing up straight. The deep state is being exposed. There are no secrets anymore since President Trump explains his vision almost every day, it seems. He knows what he wants to get done, and he knows he has less than 4 years to do it. Streamlining government, where DC's advice and consent no longer seems too relevant. It's easy to see the downfalls of the Department of Education. So much money was spent on poor policies, and it's the students who have suffered. What's FEMA doing? The people who got flooded out in their homes in North Carolina now have to read about $59 million being spent on luxury hotels for illegal immigrants in New York City, and that's in 1 week. Well, who other than the insiders knew that USAID spent millions promoting tourism in Lebanon, even as the State Department was warning not to travel there because of the terrorist? Or that USAID financed the bat studies about the coronavirus at the Wuhan lab. It's hard to trace because it was paid through a pass-through agency. Our tax dollars at work. Well, this is just the beginning of the DOGE project, rooting out waste. If they find enough, maybe we'll even see our taxes cut later this year. Imagine that. We'll go back to keeping what we've earned. Did you know that $20 to $30 is taken out of every $100 you earn? Imagine a $100 bill in your hand, taking $20 to $30 from each one and mailing it to Washington or to your state capital. Every $100, every single time you get paid. Well, long before President Trump brought Elon Musk aboard, there was an organization called the Government Accountability Institute. That's exactly where our next guest is from, and he spent his career accounting for the money. The Vice President of GAO, Eric Eggers, welcome back to our show.
Alan, it's great to be with you as always.
Well, tell me this before we get into any specific cases, and without divulging any inside information on how you and Peter Schweitzer and Seamus Bruner get the exclusives that you uncover. But what do your instincts tell you about where to look for the waste and theft when there's so much spending every year?
I think it spans as far as the eye can see. You know, Alan, it's funny. Everything you just laid out reminds me very much of that scene in the movie Dave when he brings in Charles Grodin. They go over the budget and they're like, wait, we're spending this much to do this? This is like that on steroids, except for it's even worse because there's an extra zero. And the money that you just mentioned from USAID is going overseas, or more often it's going to cultural programs that don't reflect the values of the American people or the values the American people want to see reflected in their government. And that's one of the messages they made very clear in November. We just did a podcast where we talked about you've got U.S. senators defending $20 million, Alan, to have Sesame Street broadcast in Iraq, as if there's somehow Iraqi children are going to learn about hygiene and manners from stuffed animals as opposed to ISIS. But this is a policy that the United States government thinks makes sense. We're spending $2 million to promote LGBT activism in Guatemala. The military is spending $2.3 million on a VR training program to teach our military, teach men and women whose job it is to protect this country with guns and bullets, how to have hard conversations about DEI. So that's the kind of ridiculous thing you would think was invented in Hollywood, but unfortunately it's all too real.
Well, I've heard you and your associates talk about how bulletproof your investigations are. Tell our viewers why it is that you can stand by your reporting 100%, especially while so much of the media deals in opinion and generally less than truthful reporting.
The media doesn't just deal with opinion and less than truthful reporting, they're dealing in hysteria. And that's one of the reasons why every time you see Donald Trump do anything, and he's done a lot, he's had 38 executive actions in the first 2 weeks. Only Joe Biden and Harry Truman had more than that in their first 100 days. So Donald Trump's on pace to outdo both of those presidents potentially combined, and the media is losing their mind every step of the way. But they can't attack our reporting because it's based on facts. We dig through tax records. We're going through budgets. We're cross-referencing it with phone records and mapping out relationships. And that's what we've always done. Alan, you mentioned USAID. I actually traveled to Haiti to investigate some potential USAID abuse back in 2014. It had to do with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton back when they were in charge of the rebuild of Haiti. And what we found is that Hillary Clinton's Department of State used USAID to pay a guy who ran a cell phone company that had a contract to do business in Haiti. They gave him a chance to grow his cell phone business in Haiti. At the same time, that guy was paying Bill Clinton big money to give speeches and donating money to the Clinton Foundation. So USAID is one of the things that we've helped report on for nearly a decade in terms of abuse of tax dollars and unfortunately not furthering American interests abroad. And that's just what we've consistently tried to do with the Government Accountability Institute.
Well, people are asking questions now that so much mismanagement has been disclosed. A big question is, to what extent did the U.S. actually help our enemy? And the main enemy of Israel, Iran and Hamas. There's two very blatant examples that are kind of in the news now. GAI was the group that traced Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's approval of the sale of a uranium plant with the active ingredient in nuclear weapons. The plant was closed, but Putin then helped Kazakhstan get their uranium into the hands of Iran. If that wasn't bad enough, we've recently learned that President Obama approved more than $300 million for a concrete plant for the Palestinians. Much of Gaza is made of concrete, including the hundreds of miles of tunnels that Hamas built to hide from Israel. So uranium for Iran's nukes and concrete to hide the terrorist. With all the reporters in this country, why didn't that make the air?
Unfortunately, Alan, I think you know the answers because it doesn't fit the narrative that most mainstream media outlets attempt to sell to the American people. And that's one of the reasons programs like yours are so important. People need to hear the truth somewhere. We have consistently told people how the United States, unfortunately, doesn't just aid our enemies, but oftentimes members of the United States government who should be defending the American people's interests actually make money on doing the opposite by betraying their interests. That's why the Joe Biden, Hunter Biden Chinese business deal story was so important. You have Hunter Biden entering into a $1.5 billion deal with the Chinese Communist Party that they then used to buy up American companies with access to what's called dual-use technology. That's technology that Chinese military were very interested in because it had potential application. You mentioned the Hillary Clinton helping facilitate the sale of uranium to Vladimir Putin. They didn't just help do that. The Clintons made money off of that. That's why they were involved. $140 million went to their foundation from people that were involved in that transaction. So it's not just anti-American interests. It's unfortunately pro-crony financial dealings, and that's what makes it even worse than it should be.
Well, we'll be back with more from the Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute, Eric Eggers, right after this short break. Send us some emails that we can incorporate into our shows. Email them to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. Well, we're back now with one of the country's great investigative reporters, Eric Eggers. President Trump told Bret Baier that his next stops for the Elon Musk Doge team is going to be the Department of Education, then the Pentagon. Where do you think he should go after that to find some of this tremendous waste?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of places he should go, and I think the Department of Education is an excellent place to start. But I would caution President Trump. You know, we've interviewed on our Drill Down podcast somebody who has previously run the Department of Education in the state of Florida and is a university president now. And he cautioned against shutting down the Department of Education for one very real reason. And that is that the states are basically in charge of education if you eliminate any federal oversight. So there's a reason why states like California, New York, and states with very liberal ideologies and very powerful teachers' unions might very much be okay with no federal oversight. So I think cutting waste and abuse in the Department of Education is a great idea. Doge, I think, recently identified something like $900 million in grants to just essentially help cross-reference school performance across states, as if an Excel spreadsheet can't do that. So I think there's a lot of good ideas there. But the reality, Alan, is that waste and abuse and too much taxpayer dollar has flooded Washington, D.C. I previously worked on an expose that identified how wealthy Washington, D.C. had become. They actually lead the nation in wine consumption per capita. And of all the counties in this country, 6 out of 10 of the wealthiest counties in this country surround Washington, D.C. That's how much taxpayer money's there, much of it not going for things that actually benefit the American people. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole, man. You could put a blindfold on and throw a dart, and you'd find some money that probably deserves to be cut.
Well, we've heard so many examples of spending that seems just indefensible. USAID and its transgender comic books for other countries, things I would have never imagined. But the president has now made clear that where this is spending that would support our values, we'll do it. But it'll be under the trusted leadership of the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Listen to what he said.
We have to solve the fraud, waste, abuse, all the things that have gone in the government. You take a look at the USAID, the kind of fraud in there,
and you
where
found
the money's
significant
going.
things.
Well, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of money that's going to places where it shouldn't be going, where if I read a list, you'd say this is ridiculous. And now there's some good money, and we can do that through any one of a number. I think I'd rather give it to Marco Rubio over at the State Department. Let him take care of the few good ones.
What percentage of that USAID budget do you think represents the few good ones, as the president refers to them?
It's not a lot, Alan. I mean, I think that's the point. If the number of executives, or excuse me, the number of examples of waste, abuse, and spending that run counter to American principles and values have flooded the zone, so to speak, it's because that's how prevalent they are. You know, Marco Rubio got his start in Florida. He was the Speaker of the House, and Florida has a very lean budget. They don't run up any debt, and that's part of the state constitution. So he comes from a background of being fiscally responsible. So I agree with President Trump. I trust Secretary Rubio to defend American values. You know, his first stop as Secretary of State was in Latin America, where he visited the Panama Canal. He visited Panama, and he told them that we would potentially reclaim ownership of the Panama Canal if they don't stop letting these Chinese companies run the canal, which is in contravention of what the agreement was supposed to be. So it just shows you how fundamentally different the power dynamic is becoming. The United States is leveraging the full weight and credit of what it means to be the most powerful nation in the world, and the rest of the world is taking note.
Well, let's turn the clock back for a moment. GAI uncovered millions of dollars that made its way to the Biden family. There were so many examples involving Joe's brother Jim, his son Hunter, and others. Then just before he left office, President Biden signed off on multiple pardons, not just for Jim and Hunter, but for his brother Frank, his sister Valerie, her husband as well. Look, I'm not an investigator, but what does that tell you about the extent of how far and wide Senator, Vice President, and then President Biden used his influence to collect foreign money?
Yeah, there was a Supreme Court ruling, I think back in 1915, in which the Supreme Court Chief Justice held that if you accept a pardon, there's an implicit admission of guilt in that. And so I do think that there's clearly an admission that they are guilty of many things. You know, when Joe Biden first pardoned Hunter, the media narrative was, oh, he's just a loving and concerned father, and anybody would do the same thing if they could protect their son. Well, Joe Biden is now a loving and protective brother. He's a loving and protective uncle. He's a loving and protective, like brother-in-law. He's got a lot of relatives he's taking care of. And I think the fact that these timelines have stretched back over a decade shows you just how widespread the Biden money-making scheme has been, how long it's been in operation, and the fact that it ran through December 1st of 2024 for Hunter Biden and up until this year for the rest of the family, to me suggests that there's a possibility that when Joe Biden was forced to step out of the race for re-election, that his family may have been involved in some negotiations, and who knows what the Bidens received in return for Joe Biden stepping down. But to the extent that any laws may have been violated in that negotiation process, his family would now be covered from any prosecution for that. So I think it's very notable to see how many of his family members received pardons and for the time frame under which they received them as well.
One last question about the Elon Musk mission. Some Democrats are trying to use the courts to stop the cost cutting. Will that just delay the effort, or can a judge actually prevent the president from cutting these costs?
Hey, let me quote the great legal scholar Joe Biden when he wanted to forgive student loan debt. He said, "The courts may try to stop me, but I won't let them." So there's clear precedent from a president saying what he will and will not let the courts do. I think that the Trump administration has smart lawyers. The fact that they're taking all these executive action is not an accident. And so, I don't blame Donald Trump for not trusting the court system. Remember, these guys brought 4 different charges against him, and he seems to have prevailed in the legal system in all of them. So at the end of the day, I think he's reflecting what the American people voted for. So I'd expect him to prevail on this issue as well.
Well, Eric Eggers, thank you for coming back on tonight. It's always a learning experience to hear what you and the GAI are up to.
Alan, it's always my pleasure to be with you and your audience, and God bless you and the work you continue to do by telling the American people the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. When we come back, some thoughts of my own. I believe the election last November was another episode of shaking in our nation. Things that have been hidden, corruption, improprieties in our government, they're being exposed on a daily basis, and I believe that's a good thing. I admire what DOJ is doing and what Eric Eggers and the Government Accountability Institute have been doing. Accountability has been lacking in D.C. We have sent a string of leaders to Washington, D.C. for a long time now, over the course of many years. Many of them, when they got those appointments, spent decades in Washington without any other jobs or means of employment. Yet somehow they find themselves to have accumulated tremendous resources and personal wealth. Now, I'm not really opposed to that, but the fact is that the organizations they lead are supposed to be leading our nation. Yet these leaders have steered us beyond bankruptcy. Our country is teetering on the point of total financial collapse. What we're doing is unsustainable. And now politicians and bureaucrats lecture us that we should pay more, that there's more deserved. Well, in any other arena, if you were earning obscene amounts of money while destroying and dismantling the organization you're leading, you wouldn't be celebrated as a wonderful leader. You'd be ridiculed, mocked, and replaced. We wouldn't bless it. Yet we've watched that happen during our lifetime, and we've just kept doing it over and over. Well, I'm grateful that the haze is beginning to clear and the smoke is beginning to lift. We needed to look at what was happening in our nation with a different perspective and a different set of views. Now, unfortunately, and this part's awkward, the church is equally guilty. We've done our best to keep the haze running, and we're going to have the courage to tell the truth now. That begins at our kitchen tables, at our holiday tables, in our friends' networks. If we will begin to be advocates for the truth, I believe we will find it sustainable even in Washington, D.C. And if we do that, I promise there's more reason for hope than despair. Be back with your emails in just a moment. Thank you for your emails. We always look forward to reading them. Dave W. from Bridgeville, Pennsylvania said, I'm encouraged by all of President Trump's executive orders, but they can be undone as easily as they were done. Republicans need to learn from the Democrats and unite and pass legislation to keep the orders in place while they can. Well, Dave, I agree. Those presidential orders, those executive orders are pretty fragile things from one administration to the next. I think even more importantly, we have to have a change of heart on Main Street in America, so that when we elect persons, whether they're Republican or Democrat, our values reflect a biblical worldview. That extends beyond executive orders and beyond administrations. That's a heavy lift, but it starts in our lives with our voices and our influence. It's worthwhile. Lady emailed, the biggest problem facing our nation today is ungodliness, or as I usually say, doing what is right in our own eyes. We're living as in the days of Judges. When I read all the money the U.S. aid gave to foreign countries and the proposed projects, I was angry that some bureaucrat authorized those expenditures. It is unsettling to see how sloppy we've been with the money. The suspicion is that when the dollars are being handed out so indiscriminately, that they're flowing in a lot of different directions. It's great to turn the light on, and perhaps we'll bring some fiscal responsibility back to Washington. Finally, Sandra Jeans writes, I'd like to know your opinion about Trump's claim that China AI product DeepSeek may have the capability to track our web data and should be banned in the U.S. I hear you when you tell us to put our trust in God, and that's what I pray about every day. I just hope that all the people who lead our nation are always making trusting in the Lord their priority. Well, it starts with us. If we'll do that, then God will respond. Him I have confidence in. Make sure you send your emails to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. From all of us here in Nashville, thank you for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening.